First-time home buyer, no money down. In fact, they got money given to them at the closing table. That sounds impossible, right? But let me tell you about this deal that I was working. So I had this realtor who reached out to me. He said, hey, look, Michael, I got this young couple. They're trying to buy a house. He just switched jobs. They're trying to buy their first house coming out of an apartment. Can you reach out to him? So I give him a call. And I asked some introductory questions like, hey, what are you guys looking for? Why do you want to buy a house now? Like, what is it now that you want to do? And after talking to him for a little bit, he was just telling me him and his new wife, he just got a new job and, they're looking to maybe grow a family, and they first want to start out by buying a house. Now, these type of people, I love to help. And the reason why I love to help, because I was there. I was one of those people, right? You were probably one of those people where you're newly married. It's this new journey you're about to begin. And of course, you want to solidify this with starting a family. And part of that is owning your own home, owning your own space. So I knew that there was going to be a couple hurdles. I asked them what their FICO score. It was decent in the 700s. So I didn't think there was a problem there. But when I asked him how much money he had in the bank, he told me $2,000. And at the time I was thinking, okay, we could do a down payment assistance, but the problem is going to be closing costs, right? You got title fees, origination fees, you got escrow, you got to prepay stuff, and there's all these things that you have to buy, and it definitely costs more than $2,000. So I was like, okay, well, how much is the house you're looking for? And as I remember, it was like 320 in the 300s. And I said, all right. So I went to town. I have a toolbox. I'm a broker, right? So I have this toolbox of lenders, and I started looking at, all right, DPA, down payment assistance. Who do I got? What can we do? And I come across this lender who says, we will give 101.5 LTV. Now, let me explain what that is. LTV is loan to value, and 101 is more than the purchase price. I said, okay, what's the catch? What do we got to do here? So he says, all right, the first thing you need to do, we do want to get a seller's credit. He said, that could be important. We don't need it, but a seller's credit will help. So they asked for, I think, 3% of the seller's credit. And he says, as long as they fit this criteria, they have, decent credit, they have a good source of income. And that was one kind of red flag that I had, is like, all right, we just switched jobs. Were we off a little bit for a job? And we were. So the situation, the gentleman was off, just switching careers, wants to be an entrepreneur. So he took 6 months off. And when you take 6 months off, you have to have a letter of explanation of why you are not employed, because every lender, no matter what it is, they want to see at least a consistency of 2 years of employment, especially if you're trying to buy your primary home. So we're going in there, and I'm like, all right, so, letter of expectation. I said, tell me what happened in these 6 months. He said, well, I wanted to create a video game. I had this, inspiration of, doing this thing, and I wanted to do it on my own. And I respect that, because I am an entrepreneur at heart. So I understand what that means. I just was hoping that this didn't affect his approval process, especially when it comes to a down payment assistance program, because typically those are FHA, which means they're government loans, and they are extremely strict. They're strict by the house you can buy, because they want it to meet certain guidelines, and they want you to be consistent, because they don't want to lose their money. This game is all about risk, right? The more risk there is, the worse terms you're going to get. And you'll hear me say that 1,000 times, because that's what this all comes down to. Anybody can get approved. Anybody can get approved. The question is, how much risk is involved, and how much money are you going to have to come to the table? Because the less risk, the less money you have to come to the table. All right, so I'm talking to this lender, and he says 101, and he's explaining to me, so this down payment assistance program, one, they're going to give you 3.5% towards your down payment, right? So your down payment is going to be covered. But now what they do is, with 101.5 LTV, loan to value, is that they actually roll it into the closing cost or into a second mortgage. So your closing costs, it's not that you don't pay for closing costs, it's that you don't have to pay now for closing costs. So I explained this to the borrower. I said, look, this is how it's going to work. I said, we're going to basically, your down payment is going to be taken care of. We're going to need a seller's credit, and we're going to roll in the closing cost into the loan. So you're not going to have to pay the origination fee up front. You're not going to have to pay the title fees or the escrow. All that's going to be rolled into a second mortgage, which is a way lower payment than what you're paying, or than what you would pay coming up out of your pocket. And all of that sound good. So as I'm working the deal, we have a rough estimate of the numbers, because when you start a loan, we give you an estimate, and we typically overvalue the estimate so that you don't have to be surprised and have to come out of money, but it's actually going to be less money. So overpricing things, stuff like, okay, let's say the appraisal. The appraisal normally is going to be, let's say, $600 to $800, depending on who we choose, but we set it at $1,100, right? So there's a $300 difference, but what it happens is we call it over-disclosing. We over-disclose. Your credit report typically is $130, but we over-disclose it at $150. So I know it's an estimate, and I know it's not truly the actual cost, especially when it comes to title, because title at the end of the day is the people who kind of bring all the numbers together. They figure out the taxes, they do the escrow, and they're going to give us final numbers. And once we get the clear to close, they give us the final numbers. So I want to make sure, I know this couple, they just don't have a lot of money, and I want to help them, right? And that's one thing I'm passionate about. I love to serve. I'm going to say that 1,000 times, but I'm passionate about helping them. So as I'm sitting there, I'm just, I'm calling the lender. That, the next day I said, okay, I said, please tell me there's not going to be no curveballs or no last minute thing that you're going to tell me that all of a sudden these people need $8,000. Because when we're doing the initial loan estimate, it shows they owe $6,000 to $8,000, and that's part of the closing costs. And I was like, and I'm calling him, and he tells me it's gonna be okay. Don't worry about it. I do thousands of these a year. Don't worry about this. We're gonna be okay. And listen, what I know now is the account executive for the banks or for the lenders or for the private money or whoever I'm dealing with, they will literally say anything to get you to do the deal with them. And then you're so deep in the mud with these people, and at the last second they try to switch things. And again, who looks bad? This guy, because I'm the quarterback. I'm quarterbacking this thing, and I'm making sure we're getting stuff to them on time. I'm making sure that everything is smooth, the numbers are correct, and I don't like curveballs neither. No one does. So as I'm sitting there, I'm making sure, I probably called the account executive probably 10 times. I've emailed him back and forth. And again, because I want these people to close so bad. But no deal is ever as smooth as you want it to be. You want it to be smooth, but sometimes they're just not as smooth as you'd like. So as we're coming to the closing, the realtor's like, hey, we needed this closed in 20 days. The seller's, pushing for it. And typically, I could do that all day with, investment loans and DSCRs and fix and flips. We can get them done sometimes in 48 hours. I got a lender who preaches that. But typically it takes about a week for the fix and flips. Now the primary homes take a little bit longer. They're 4 weeks, So I reached out to the seller. I said, look, we're a little bit under the time crunch because of the seller. And the seller, I don't know what's happening on their side, but they need this closed in 3 weeks. And he said, we could do this, but we just have to be on our P's and Q's. We got to get conditions in on time and make sure everything is submitted correctly. So as we're going through this process, I tell them that, hey, look, realtor and borrower, hey, look, we got to get this. I'm going to ask you for bank statements. I need them fast. I'm going to ask you for W-2s. I need them fast. We're going to have to verify employment. That happens. That takes a couple days. The appraisal itself, we got to get it scheduled, get them out there. That takes probably 3 or 5 days, sometimes a week. So as I'm going through this, we're ticking. We're getting the realtor's getting a little bit nervous. He's calling me a week before, and I'm like, look, we're good. I said, I know we don't have what they call a CTC, which is clear to close. I know we don't have this clear to close yet, but the lender is promising me that we're on track. And I've talked to this guy probably 20 times by now within these past 2 weeks. And that is no joke. I am on him. I'm on him. We are in this together. That's what I tell them. We are in this together. We're closing on time. We're about a day before closing, and we're clear to close. And what happens? the seller tells us that we need another 2 weeks to close. And I'm like, what? And they use some terminology that I didn't recognize. And I'm like, what does this mean? So all of us are on this email. The realtor calls me. It's 9:00 at night. I pick up my phone because I know we're like, this is the closing hour. And he's like, do you believe this? This seller is pushing us to get this thing closed early. And now they're telling us they need us another 2 weeks. Now, here's the thing. The borrower is renting a home, right? And they've already put in their 30-day notice. And this 2 weeks is literally taking us up to the deadline of the first of the month. And I'm thinking to myself, man, it's not the fact that we can't close and get them in on the first. It's not that. Well, one, they got to pack. They got to move. They got to be out in a certain time. I don't want them to get charged extra for being at an apartment and they're staying over. So I was a little nervous for him. And given the fact that this borrower or the seller has switched up on us at the last second, I'm worried that it's going to happen again. So what I found out there's this term that they use. What I found out, I did some searching. I called some people. I did my due diligence and come to find out that this property is with investors and it's part of a portfolio loan. And part of this portfolio loan has 250 houses in this loan. So what that means, a portfolio loan means basically I'm going to buy a whole bunch of properties, and instead of paying separate mortgages on each property, I'm going to lump sum all of them into one loan. But here's the problem when you use portfolios, is that when you go to sell one property or 5 properties out of that portfolio, you have to refinance out of that portfolio. So now the seller has to get that property out of that portfolio so it has a clear title and that it has the value that it's supported. Also, with the other loan that they have, it has to support that, that property when you pull it out, it's worth so much to that loan. So that loan has to refinance and it still has to have the value of what they owe on it. Hopefully that wasn't too deep. The whole point is when you do portfolio loans, they get messy when you go to sell. All right. So understanding that now, it makes sense why they need another 2 weeks, because those loans are not easy to do. You basically almost have to get appraisals for the loan they're pulling out and all the other loans because they have to clear whatever they owe. So I try to explain this to a brand new couple who's never bought a house before, who don't understand, anything. And I explained it to the realtor, and while we were talking, he's like, oh my gosh, this is going to be difficult for them to understand. But, I'm very clear with how I communicate, and I made sure that I broke it down into very simple terms so that they understood. The other problem as we're coming up is that the loan rate, we locked in the rate because it was such a good rate, right? So we locked it in for 30 days. And now, being that we were going past due the date that it was supposed to close, their rate was going to expire. So I call the lender and I explain this whole situation of what's going on. And what they tell me is like, hey, we can extend the rate, but it's going to be at a cost. It's going to be $50 a day to hold this rate. And I wanted to hold the rate because at this point, we knew that they were not coming no money out of pocket, and they were actually going to get $1,500 back at closing. So at closing, they're going to get a $1,500 check for buying a house, which is crazy, right? Like, because when you think you have to buy a house, especially a first-time home buyer, you're so scared to buy a house because it's so much money that has to come out of your pocket, right? You're like, do I need tens of thousands of dollars? I need a down payment of 20%. I need the closing costs. And typically, you don't need the down payment of 20%. You could do it at 3.5%. In this case, they got down payment assistance and they got money back, which is crazy. So I knew with the rate we had, everything was good. And, with the market, how it's been, things have been going up and down with whatever's happening in the world, as it always does. And we're sitting there, and I'm like, all right, so the question is, who pays for this extension? And ultimately, it falls on the borrower, right? It's the borrower who does it. So I'm telling the realtor, and the realtor's pissed. He's swearing. He's cussing. He's throwing a fit because I understood. He's like, Michael, you have no idea. These people pressured us so much to get this deal done in 20 days, and there was so much pressure. And now they need another 2 weeks. You have no idea. So he wants. I'm telling the borrower. I'm telling the buyer, like, to cancel this deal. Let's get out of it. And I'm thinking to myself, oh man, we've worked so hard. We've worked so hard on this deal. I said, I try to calm him down. I said, listen, it's going to be okay. I said, we're going to figure this out. Let's make sure that because this is the seller's problem and this is the seller's fault, let's make sure that they cover it. So when we go past contracts, they have to sign addendums and extensions and all this other stuff. I said, make sure when you ask for this extension on this addendum that you make sure that they're paying for it. So he's going back and forth with them. He calls me the next day. He's like, do you believe that they only want to cover half? I said, well, maybe now you are justified to walk from the deal, because at the end of the day, it's best for the borrower. It's not best for me, or not best for you. I said, but if you feel that, you guys are getting, if you guys are getting played, then you more than likely walk away. Then don't let them take advantage of you. But I also said, but don't let $250 be the deciding factor whether or not these people get a home, because they needed a 10-day extension. It'd be $50 a day, so it's $500. I said, don't let the $250, because if your ego get the best of us and we all lose out and they lose out on all. Because they were looking for a home for months, and they found this home and it was perfect for them. So at the end of the day, we closed the deal. It all worked out. So it was just crazy to see that I was able to get these people a home where they got paid out of the transaction, being a first-time home buyer, being that he had a lapse of employment for 6 months. And at the end of the day, like, I know, they didn't really have a lot of money, because during the transaction, they were calling me a lot and just making sure, like, they had enough money. And I told them, like, at worst case scenario, maybe you can get a gift of funds. I said, but from what I understand, like, this is going to be free and clear. And as I think about their situation now, what they're in, they probably are saying, man, we should have did this a long time ago. Because sometimes that happens to me. Sometimes the first step is the scariest step. And even with me, I'm trying to get into own more properties, and we're getting into fix and flips now, where we have just like, we bought more stabilized homes, but we're getting into fix and flips now. And, it's that first step. It's scary. Even though I run these deals all day long, I'm helping, a lot of investors with their fix and flip deals. So I get to see behind the scenes. I get to see what they're doing, how they're using their contractors, all that stuff, which is great. But that first step is the scariest step. So all to say, if you stuck around, thank you for listening. I appreciate it. If you know any first-time home buyers that need help with down payment assistance, and I'm not saying I can do it every time, but I can say I at least have done it this time, where they got money back at the table. It can happen to you. DM me, give me a call, reach out to me, and I would love to serve you. Thank you again.